Okay, so I wanted to do a quick video to hopefully get you guys on board and comfortable with how to do this reciprocity exercise that I'm going to have you guys do. So for starters, let's just look at, of course, you know, we have to do full stops for this. Well, we don't have to. It's easier to do full stops. That's why I'm asking you guys to do full stops. So the first thing that I ask you to do is just to, like, you know, map out what full stops are. And of course we have our shutter speed, we have our aperture, and we have ISO. Okay, so some standard stop, I mean, just to get us like off on the right foot, standard or full stops, I sometimes say standard, I use standard and full interchangeably, but of course it means the same thing. What I'm saying is it's a doubling halving of light. Okay, so shutter speed, some standard stops, and it's on that sheet. It has you go through some of them. So, you know, it would be things like, you know, 1/60th of a second, one stop less light, it was 1/125th, which is roughly half the amount of time. Then 1/250th, 1/500th, 1/1000th, 1/2000th. And so I have you guys write these out just because I want you to see how mathematically they do work in some cases and then don't necessarily work. And then also you got to understand what's more or less light. So this is more light over here. I'm going to put a little sunshine thing. And this is less over here. So this is a faster shutter speed. The shutter is open for a shorter period of time, and less light hits the film or the sensor. Now aperture's a little bit different. I'm going to keep more light, less light, just like this. Some standard apertures, we have 2.8, 4, 5.6, 8, 11, 16, 22, and so on and so forth. Now these don't make as much sense. Hopefully you're seeing this in the lecture information already. This is a ratio. This is a ratio of the opening of the lens to the length of the lens. So that's why it doesn't make sense, you know, necessarily numerically. You might think that a bigger number means more light. A bigger number actually means a smaller opening, less light gets in, and then a smaller number means a bigger opening and more light gets in. And then ISO, so now it's not more light, less light. It's more sensitive, less sensitive. So some standard ISOs: 1600, 800, 400, 200, 100. Okay. Now these are all standard or full stops. Okay. So you know, a 4 is one stop less light than the 2.8. Okay, so that's why I have you guys write those out at first. Now I'm going to show you a basic little exercise, and I'm going to try to do something like maybe a little more practical here. Let me move this over. Okay, so here I have an old school, well, it's not that old actually, light meter, and I'm just going to meter the light that I have right here. So it's telling me that at an ISO of 400, it basically, I gave it a time value and an ISO, and it's telling me what my F number should be. So it's saying, and I'll go back here again, at 1/60th of a second and an ISO of 400, my aperture should be a 1, which is that's just almost, it's not. I think that there's actually been one camera that actually could do that, or one lens that actually could do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write down 60th of a second, and then over here I'm going to write down 400th of a second, and then F1, which doesn't even make sense, but we're going to go with it because it's a reciprocity exercise. So shutter, aperture, and ISO. We're going to assume that you're using film, so ISO is going to stay the same, although we can actually change ISO. So, but let's just do this way. I'm going to just do, like, you know, 400, 400. I'm going to just do a couple of them here. Now, let's say I eventually, what I want to do is I want to, and I'm actually doing this because this is low light. This is actually going to end up being, I'm going to show you apertures and shutters, or I'm sorry, shutter speeds that you're not going to typically see, but it's still a good exercise. So I want to get to, like, let's say I want to get to an f16, and that's going to make my shutter speed ridiculous, but that's okay. That's a good exercise for us to do this. And in the meantime, I'm also, let me just throw in f8 and f4. Okay, so now what I need to do is, how do I get the correct shutter speed? This is the whole thing with, this is the whole point of reciprocity here. If this is my baseline exposure that my meter is telling me is correct, how do I change it? Like, because f1, just not possible. You know, there's one lens I'm even aware of that even can do that, and you can't even buy it except on eBay at this point. So I need to get from f1 to f16. I'm going to do it incrementally, okay? I'm going to do it by counting stops. So I'm just going to count how many stops are there between f1 and f4. Now, I'm going to go back to that other page here, and I'm going to, you know, so f4 to f2.8 is one stop, but I can also keep going mathematically. See this pattern here? So it's 22, 11, 5.6, 2.8. 16, 8, 4. So there is actually some reliable numbers here. So I can actually just mathematically work out that the next stop smaller than 4 is a 2. I'm sorry, 2.8 is a 2. And after that is a 1.4. And then after that is actually a 1. So I can actually, I can go from, so I'm trying to go from, sorry, back and forth here. From an f1 to an f4, I can actually count that out. So I have 1 to 1.4 to 2 to 2.8 to 4. That's 1, 2, 3, 4 stops of light. So essentially with the aperture from here to here, I am decreasing by 4 stops. Okay, I am cutting the light in half 4 times. I need to increase the amount of light 4 times when I do my shutter speed. So let's do this, and now I'm going to work completely off the scale with the shutter speeds as well, but the shutter speeds are a little easier to work with because it's going to make sense mathematically. Okay, so I need to go 4 stops more light than a 60th of a second. So let's go over here. I'm going to have 1/60th. Now the interesting thing, the thing here with to get more light, I want to make my shutter speed slower. So one more stop is a 30th. That's 1. I'm just going to put 1, 2, 3, 4 stops. Then a half of a 30th is a 15th. Double of a 30th is a 15th. Then 1/8. Then 1/4 of a second. So over here, 4 more stops with my shutter speed. This 1/4 of a second at f4 is the exact same thing as 1/60th of a second at f1. Do the same thing here. From 4 to 8, now I actually have a little cheat sheet that helps me out with that there. So 4 to 8, I'm just going to go 1, 2 stops, and that's less light. Now I'll come back over here. I need to go from 1/4, I need 2 stops more, so 1/4, and I want 1, 2 stops more light. That's a half a second and a full second. And sometimes you'll see the full second with a little quote mark next to it to indicate that it's a full second. So now I can go back, and again, 1 full second at f8 is the same thing, same amount of light as 1/60th at f1. And then the last one, f8 to f16. Again, flip back to my little cheat sheet I made for myself. Your camera itself is a cheat sheet because it actually has these same sets of numbers on it. So I'm going from, what did I say? F8 to F16. So 11, 16, that's 2 stops, half the amount of light. So now I'm going to come back over here. I want to go from 1 second, and I'm going to add 2 stops of light. 1 times 2 is 2. 2 times 2 is 4. So now these are full seconds now. 4 seconds at f16, exact same thing up here as a 60th at f1. So this is the basic idea with reciprocity. And you see here, this actually ended up being a really good example because I'm metering in an area where the light is really low, and at an ISO of 400, that's just going to be really tricky, okay? Now let's try to do this again. I'm going to come back, I'm going to move up here. Actually, I'm going to bring my same reading, 1/60th of a second. Let me put a little line here. F1, that ridiculous number, and 400. Okay, so now let's try this again, but we're going to do this a different way. Now this time, I'm going to say, you know what? I don't want to go any slower than 1/60th of a second because I'm actually shooting handheld. So what the heck do I do here? So let's just put 1/60th, 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 but I'm still going to try to get to some different ISOs now, or I'm sorry, to some different apertures. Now this one I can't quite, I don't want to get too crazy with because the numbers are just going to be something that's not possible for you. But I'll just go here f1.4, f2, and f2.8. Now these are numbers you'll actually see. Some of you actually have f1.4 lenses. That's a really fast lens. You have some f2 lenses, and I'm going to guess that pretty much everybody who's shooting film has a 2.8. So now let's see how we could, if we wanted to switch films, or if we were shooting digitally, we could actually change the ISO so that we could honor that 1/60th of a second, and at the same time get these apertures that we want. Okay, so now we're going to look here. So basically, I've just gone one stop each direction. So if we go back here, and I know my chicken scratch, you know what? I'm just going to do it down here. So let's do the apertures again. So 1, 1.4, 2, 2.8, 4, 5.6, and on. So those are full stops each time, okay? So basically, if you look at this, I'm just moving one stop. So now let's look at the ISOs. So we're starting at a 400, okay? As the number increases on the ISO, that becomes more sensitive to light. As we decrease, it's less sensitive to light. We're actually stopping down our aperture, so we need to increase the sensitivity by one stop each time. Now these make sense mathematically. As I go from an f1 to an f4, I'm cutting the light in half. I want to double the sensitivity of the ISO, I go to 800. Again, from 1.4 to 2, I'm cutting the light in half. I'm going to double the ISO number to make it twice as sensitive. And then now we're getting into some silly numbers. I think you actually can get 3200 speed film still, but that's a really sensitive high grain film. And most digital cameras are going to be very noisy because, as we talked about in the lecture, the more sensitive the film is or the sensor is, the more grain or noise we get. All right, so that's my quick little tutorial to try to hopefully get you guys, if you haven't gotten comfortable with it yet, a little bit more comfortable with reciprocity.